Hey there, church family, and those hopping in with us for these videos and this reading. Congratulations. You are in day 32 of this Bible reading plan in a new month, February 1st. And so great job. Keep it up. My name is Thomas Mobley, and I'm just going to walk through some of the stuff that I saw in these passages, and I hope that you enjoyed as well reading. Exodus 7, 8, and 9. And so some of the things that I noticed in these passages, some very familiar things. If you are new to reading the Bible or not new to reading the Bible, these are probably still some very familiar stuff. A lot of what we see here is what's been portrayed in movies and stories, even in the secular world where it's just a well-known story of what's going on. We see in these passages the start of plagues coming to Egypt and to Pharaoh because they are not acknowledging and worshiping God, the one true God for who he is. In fact, that's one of the things I've seen here is the fact that the one true God, Yahweh, will not be mocked by those who do not worship him as such. And so that's one of the things I've seen in here. I also see that God's just faithful. Maybe you saw that God's faithful to his covenant with his people. He's made promises to make their nation great, which he has, but he's also made promises to bring them back to the land where they came from, and that's where God's wanting to take them to. So Moses and Aaron, they go to Pharaoh and they say, God says, let his people go to go back and worship him in the promised land. And of course, we know that Pharaoh is reluctant to do so. In fact, God says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And because of that, I'm going to send signs, I'm going to send judgments to him and to his people, because he does not acknowledge me as God and he will not obey me as such. He worships other gods, and I think we actually see that he worships himself in this. So we see these plagues here, signs from God. He turns the Nile, the resource for life pretty much, into blood. And then he sends frogs in. An interesting fact that I saw in here, I don't think I've noticed this before, is that when the frogs stopped, they gathered all the frogs together, and the pile of them, I think, was so big, it says, that the ground actually sunk in, which means that was a lot of frogs to have to clean up. I would not want to be that guy with that job that has to clean up the frogs. But nonetheless, it says there's a lot of frogs that plague these people. So blood, frogs, he brings in gnats just to infiltrate everybody in the land of Egypt. And it's interesting, at this point, you actually see Pharaoh's magicians who are trying to replicate some of these signs and wonders that God was doing. They actually come to this point where they recognize that this is the Lord who's doing this work. But Pharaoh still isn't convinced. His heart is still hardened. And then he sends flies to infiltrate the land. You actually see a separation where God says, I won't infiltrate the people of God in their land in Goshen with flies. I'm only going to infiltrate the land of Egypt and the Egyptians with this plague. Same thing with the livestock. And we see that he kills off the livestock of all the Egyptians, but not the livestock of the Israelites. Just the separation, seeing that this is God's chosen people, not the Egyptians. The Egyptians are the ones that are oppressing the Israelites. Next, he brings boils on people, which never had boils, but I've heard it's pretty awful. And this is what we see here. They couldn't even stand, I don't think. And then lastly, the last one that we see here in these 7 plagues in chapter 7, 8, and 9. 7 of the 10 plagues, we see hail that's brought in. It's extremely destructive among the land, and it for people who did not listen to the Lord, it was greater because they didn't come in, and they suffered the wrath of that. So we see these 7, but all through each of these plagues, as Pharaoh's heart is softened towards making promises to let God's people go, right after the plague is ended, his heart is hardened again, because the Lord is doing that to show that he will not be mocked. So I think that's a theme that we see over and over again. As Pharaoh's heart is hardened toward God, that God shows himself evident over and over and over again. And in fact, in chapter 9, there's a group of verses that I think is really important and I'd like to read those. In chapter 9, starting in verse 14, it says, "For this time I will send all my plagues on you yourself, and on your servants and on your people," talking to Pharaoh, "so that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. For by now I could have put out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But for this purpose I have raised you up, to show you my power, so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. You are still exalting yourself against my people and will not let them go." I think what we see here is the fact that God is the one who raises up, and God is the one who brings down, with a extremely evident purpose, I think, to show the whole world that he is the one and only true God. He says Pharaoh has exalted himself. God says, "You will not be exalted above me. You are not God. And I could have wiped you out until now. But for this reason, I've actually brought you up, so that you would recognize, so that you could see through all of this that I am the one true God." And I think it's interesting. Pharaoh is this, top guy in probably the world at this point. So not only does Pharaoh see this, but the whole world would see that he is the one true God, that Yahweh will not be mocked, that Yahweh is above kings, that Yahweh's people will be honored as such. And his promises are made true, and God keeps his promises in his covenants with his people. He keeps his promises to those that do not obey him, that they will not be honored, that they'll actually see judgment for that. And so we see that he is the one true God. He won't be mocked, that he keeps his covenant to his people. God's faithful. God's faithful to that, and I'm thankful for that as one of his people, as a believer, as a Christian, that God is faithful to his people. He's faithful to keep his promises. He always has been, and he always will be. That's something that we've seen up until this point. That's something that we'll continue to see as we walk through Exodus and the rest of the Bible. Be encouraged by this. Some of this stuff can sometimes be a little disheartening just to see the destruction and the way that things happen. But what we get is an overall instruction from the Lord that he is faithful and he's a good God to those who recognize him as such and are kept by him. So I'm encouraged by that. Hope you are as well. The Lord is good. His word is good. So stay in it, be encouraged by it, and stay faithful to read the word.